if you're a Christian, you may or may not be lost. But if you're a non-Christian and you're against him, you're lost anyway. You're not lost because you're homosexual. Homosexual, practicing homosexual, someone practicing homosexuality who is not a Christian is not lost in God's eyes because of their sexual orientation. They're lost because they don't know Jesus Christ in the pardon of their sin, the ones that Jesus Christ died on the cross for. That's what's going to actually send them to hell. If you're a Christian and you fall into that lifestyle, what's going to happen to you is you're going to run into some divine chastisement. God's going to meet you coming down the road one day. And that's what I'm supposed to tell you. I ain't supposed to beat you over the head because of who you lack and how you lack them. I'm supposed to tell you there's a better way. It's up to you to accept it or reject it. I pray that you accept it. Now, so in Romans 8, the issue is settled. The only way you can receive a pardon, the only way you can be declared not guilty, the only way you can be given amnesty, however you want to call it, the only way you can have a right standing with God, the only way God will give you his righteousness, his right standing with himself, is if you have faith in his Son. Your little human flesh, your little ideas of philosophy, logic, and reason, meaningless. Absolutely meaningless. Somebody told me that Plato and Aristotle was born before Jesus Christ. Wow. There was 400 years before the coming of Jesus Christ, there was no truth from God in the earth except what was already written in the Old Testament. And then it had no meaning that anyone in the Old Testament could understand. Let me say that again. The Old Testament, during the Old Testament era, had no meaning that anyone in the Old Testament era could understand. Some of you who are theologians out there, tell your people that. You know it's true. The people in the Old Testament didn't have the foggiest idea what God was doing. They had a hint, but didn't have the foggiest idea, no truth or no reality of what God was doing or had been doing since before the creation of heaven and earth and they that dwell thereon. So that's a good introduction to part 2. We're going to get into some of these terms, and we're going to do some reading, because I know I've made some statements here. I know they're all true. But I want to show you, I want to give you some consolation. I want to give you a hope in the future. I want to do you like the Bereans did. The Bible said that the Bereans were noble people. They were conscientious. And when the Apostle Paul preached the gospel to them, using the Old Testament as a foundation based on his New Testament knowledge, they went to the Old Testament to see if what Paul was talking about was in there. And if it was, some of them believed it. But the smarter you are in the physical, the dumber you can be in the spiritual. Yes. Now, I'm going to go back to camera 1 and put up my visual again and discuss some of these terms that I've been throwing around. Restitution. Now, I have a Bible dictionary, theological dictionary, and what have you. And I have some of these terms underlined. It might take me a little while to look for them. But restitution. Restitution is to make a payment. Restitution is to pay a just debt. Make restitution for something that has been done. And in this case, restitution means God's holiness was violated, was offended by Adam's disobedience. So, since we all were in the loins of Adam, when Adam sinned and incurred physical and spiritual death, we all did. You can find that in Hebrew chapter, I think it's 6. Now, but we're talking about restitution. And restitution is a payment. When Jesus of Nazareth was crucified on the cross, it wasn't an act of mercy in God's eyes. It was restitution for Adam's sin that plunged the whole world into sin and death. And some people say that there is no such thing as original sin. Yes, there is. If there's no such thing as original sin, where do we get it from? Restitution, R-E-S, restoration, restitution. Today, restitution is called reparation. No, it's called reparation. Some people, some countries are still paying reparation for what occurred in World War II and what occurred subsequently. That's all. It's a payment for something that was done. Restitution. In the Old Testament, some things required 5-fold, 2-fold, 3-fold restitution. You steal $10 and they catch you, you have to pay it back 50. That's 5 times. That's restitution. Now, the thing about restitution is this. The offended one gets to decide what will appease him, what he will take in exchange for staying his wrath. You can't pay nobody what you owe them today in military script from Vietnam or Korea. You can't do that. It's worthless. So the one who's offended, to whom the ransom is to be paid, he has to determine what will satisfy the debt. And with God, he said the death of his son would satisfy the sin debt for the whole world once for all time. Does that mean that there is no more sin since Jesus? Absolutely not. Does it mean that Christians don't sin? Yes, we do. Well, what does it mean? It means no penalty. Sin has no power to impose a punishment. There's no consequences. For born-again believers in Jesus Christ, there's no consequences for human sin. You're going to be chastised. But if you don't know Jesus in the pardon of your sin, you are not condemned because of what you do. You're condemned because what you have not done. You have not obeyed the gospel of Jesus Christ, the good news of Jesus Christ, that God sent into the world, that he is Lord of all. All power, all authority to forgive sin is in Jesus. God transferred it to him. People still talk about God and what he's done in the Old Testament, and God going about his business. I'm using cliches and what have you, but he's doing a new thing. in people's, some pastors, their mindset is still back there on what Daniel did, what David did. And God says you better pay attention to what Jesus and those apostles have done. Restitution. You remember in Luke 19:8, Zacchaeus? They thought he'd been robbing, stealing and overcharging taxes. And as restitution, Zacchaeus said he gave it all back. He donated half his goods. Now, listen. When Zacchaeus said that he gave half of his goods, and Jesus saw this as a sign of his repentance, and converted him, Jesus had not died. So Zacchaeus was under the repentance, not for salvation, but repentance pending the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. Because after Jesus, well, I'm getting ahead of myself. I don't want to do that. But so first one we're talking about there on camera number 1, we're talking about restitution. And because of what Adam did, God sold us, or God put us all under sin and death and slavery and dominion by the devil, his demons, and Satan. He did that as punishment until he could receive satisfaction or be appeased, or his wrath be appeased. And that's redemption. Redemption is to redeem by the payment of a ransom or by the payment of a payment of the price. You put your watch in the pawn shop and you go and redeem it by paying the pawn owner what you borrowed. Well, God wanted to be good to mankind, but he couldn't be good so long as the sin debt had not been paid. He can only be providentially good. But he couldn't be the essence of goodness, because somewhere he said your sins separate you from him. But there's nothing that separates a born-again Christian believer from God. Absolutely nothing. Not even him or herself. Romans chapter, chapter 8, verses 31. I hope I can get to there. Romans chapter 8, verse 31 to 39.